So, hard things to understand, although you did pretty well. All right, so let's talk about power law size distributions. These are going to be, abstracted, pure things. We'll have a continuous one and a discrete one. And in general, we're just going to start with this sort of thing, right? So we'll have some decaying power law for the probability of something, x to the minus gamma. We're going to have this, we'll use gamma a lot. Gamma is greater than 1, which is a little simple question you have, I think, in your assignment. As to why that is, there's some minimum of x and some maximum. And so we're going to make it very simple in this kind of abstract way, right? And so that means, and of course, distributions don't really look like this, but here's our x and p of x, and there's going to be this, it's going to have some shape like this. As we've seen, as you'll see, these distributions don't look like this really, but this is x min, I think in an x max, right? And this is b in the assignments, and that's it. That's the idea. And so this is scaling as c to the x to the minus gamma. Right. Lots of natural distributions appear in the world. Gaussians, exponentials, they have good stories for them. I mean, famous ones, central limit theorem, is one of the great achievements of human thinking. Exponentials come about from failure mechanisms. These are very natural things. So these kinds of distributions appear everywhere. I'll call them the statistics of surprise because they are underlying lots of things like earthquakes and the extent that they really match them is up for debate. But these very skewed distributions, heavy-tailed distributions, is what they're called. What can happen is you get lots of things that are small and eventually some really incredibly big things. And it depends all on this exponent, right? Okay. So that's our basic setup. We'll have a discrete version as well. Let me do that, and then it will be better to do that. Yep. I have to do this. Does that work? Oh, yeah, look at that. Okay. At some point I have to use that. Okay. Bargrove first got one of these and he used it at a conference, and apparently, and he's just sort of like, chilling along, and he's like, and then apparently the whole crowd just went, it's fantastic. And he just kept it cool. He loved it. Okay, so lower cutoff and upper cutoff, right. That's the idea. These are the terms we'll use. We'll just call them cutoffs, right? This is often used in physics. Okay, so what happens with this is we claim that I'm sort of saying these distributions are everywhere in the world or something close to them, and the way we tend to look at them is in log space. And we use log 10 because of the human thing. And so log 10 of px on the left-hand side, and then we're just going to log 10 of this thing, so we get our log 10 of a constant because this is a product, and then the minus gamma comes out the front, right? We're adding these pieces together, and the minus gamma comes down here. So now in log space, this quantity is a linear function of this quantity, and it's got a minus gamma as the slope. So there's a big game of fitting these things. I'll show you in a little bit of how we can fit them in better ways by looking at kind of an integral of this, and then also Zipf's law, how it's connected completely to Zipf's law, which took a long time for people to realize, maybe 50 years. Okay, use base 10 because we're good people, right? And we say it. All right, so usually it's often just the tail, right? There's something funny going on, and it's the tail has this nice power law behavior, which people debate about. So that can be true. People will still say it's a power law size distribution. Very excited about it. And it's you'll hear these terms. You'll see this is just generally in fat-tailed or heavy-tailed, right? So exponentials are thin-tailed. They don't have much of a tail on them. Gaussians, e to the minus x squared, right? They die away really quickly. But these are getting smaller, but it turns out that they get smaller in such a slow way that that there's material out there that matters. So there are other of these heavy tail distributions. Log normals are kind of in that category, Weibel distributions. And you could certainly have a situation where you're making a mistake and it's really one of these things. So lots of arguments about which distribution in this system is really exhibiting, and then of course you want to get to the mechanisms for why that distribution is there, right? That's the big game. So show you a number of examples. Word frequency, so you can have discrete size things, so it could be word frequency, so you take Moby Dick and you count how many times each word appears. So generally in English, the will be maybe 3 or 4% of all words in a text, right? So, and these are pretty skewed, they're weird things, right? So the, of, and, an, a, about 6 words will comprise 20% of a text. And about 150 words will comprise half of the text, right? So we have the text, Moby Dick, and then we have the lexicon for Moby Dick, right? So the dictionary for Moby Dick. These are all the unique words that appear in there. And half of this list those words will only appear once. Hapax legomena. They will only appear once. That's generally true. It's a very odd thing that language, and it's of course across all different languages that this sort of structure is there. We have these very rare words that in sufficiently large corpora we use, one time in a book, say. And it's to the extent, and there'll be, so a half of the words will appear once, a sixth of them roughly will appear 2 times. And so on. And then you get up to words like the that appear all over the place. So there's an odd thing, if you're a journalist, sometimes you get paid per word, right? So my wife's a financial journalist. And if you get $1 a word, this is a good thing, or $2 a word. But 20% of that, the pay you get will be for writing the and of and and a. Yeah. It's kind of fun. Doesn't matter how long the words are either. Yeah. Got to count up some way, right? So, okay, so these are just examples. So node degree in networks, number of friends, right? This is one of the network science, which we'll get to later on, started about 20 years ago, and a big piece of it was starting to look at social networks. Hyperlinks, right? So links from web pages to other web pages, that was another big piece. So citations for articles, court decisions, so Supreme Court decisions. How many decisions in the future cite this court case, and how many does it cite going back? Same sort of thing for science, all of knowledge. In this case, really a good place connecting these things together is Wikipedia, right? Where all the links like between pages on Wikipedia. And we had a paper come out of this course that there's this sort of this notion that if you follow the first link on every page on Wikipedia, you end up at philosophy. I don't know if you heard this. So you can just do this for fun, right? So the first link kind of in the body of the text, right? So a student tested that out, and it's pretty much true, actually. There are some little cycles you get stuck in, like names of saints or something like that. You can get trapped. But mostly, and you can see it just sort of goes up and up and up, and more abstractly into bodies of thinking and so on. And in the time the snapshot we looked at, I think there was like reason and like reality and experience. There was a number of words. There was a little cycle of 6 words that just went round and round and round. It depends what has been going on with editing. Anyway, that's a fun thing to do, but there is this whole structure of knowledge. What's it like? Okay, so in that case, we're going to say the probability of k. This is now it's just right. So k is 1, 2, 3, 4. It doesn't work for k equals 0. Certainly, you can have, as I said, it's really about the tail of the distribution. You can certainly have it that this is true for large k, and it has some structure. There are actually pages with no links, or people with no friends, or whatever it is. Right. Which is not. That's a sad thing. Sad pages and people. All right. So, as I said, words are a good example. This is from the UK, a collection of words. It's a bit of a weird one because they've stuck together over time, newspaper articles, people talking on radio, all sorts of sources of text, and just kind of glued them together without any sense of whether they were popular or not. Yes?
Does this hold up in other languages?
Yeah, the Zipf's law thing? Yes. And then we'll get to it later on, but there was a lot of debate over a long period of time as to whether it meant anything, right? So at some point, and this is how one of these papers is framed, monkeys typing at a keyboard, which is us really. But like the notion that they're just texters, right? There's this sort of funny notion, Borgesian kind of notion that Shakespeare's works would appear at some point by enough monkeys typing. But there was a paper that claimed that would give rise to a Zipf's law, right? Just random bashing away and hitting a spacebar now and then, right? So there's a paper in the 2000s that has to refute that, right? This has been going for a long time. It says, it's like, no, monkeys typing it does not give you Zipf's law. But as to exactly why, it's a big piece we'll talk about, because there's a balance between whether it's an optimization thing. You could have specific words for absolutely everything, but that would be pretty cumbersome. It would require an enormous amount of encoding and decoding. Or you could have this, you could just have ook, right? And then there's a lot on the decoder, right? So we started to add more words at some point, and yeah, the evolution has been very interesting to kind of consider. All right, but we'll get to it. It's a good question. This is from Jonathan Harris, who we're a fan of in lots of ways, who actually grew up partly on Shelburne Farms. He's part of the Shelburne Farms people, the Webs. And he's an artist scientist. You could look up his stuff. He's done all sorts of super fantastic things. We had him here as a artist in residence for a while. Anyway, so he did this thing. This is years ago, and it was, I guess, Java, so it's dead, or Flash, so it's dead now, I think. But it was a little Explorer thing, right? So you could go across here and find all these words from. Let me try it. I'm not sure if it works. Okay, does it still work? No. Maybe it's dead. Yeah, Flash, and of course no one wants. Steve Jobs said no. He had this nice piece on here where it turned out that, just like the Bible code sort of thing, there would be sequences of words, and people would, kind of bring them out because they apparently had meaning, so there was, code in this sort of thing. A sneaky thing he did, though, was let people search for words just to see where they are, right? And this thing would, zoom along and show you where that word is in ranking. And then he looked at what people search for, and it wasn't great. It's a little damning. Anyway, that's all I want to say about that. XKCD, many of you probably know XKCD, which is famous for being terribly drawn and interesting. Gary Larson, has anyone ever heard of Gary Larson? So it used to be that Gary Larson cartoons were like everywhere, like every scientist would have their little favorite Gary Larson thing with a cow doing something. But it was kind of old, it's like before information and computers in a way, and he retired and they've kind of gone away. Some very funny things. Anyway, XKCD is the sort of geek cartoon now. But he did one of his little expeditions here was to write a book explaining things which used only the top 1,000 words from a ZIF distribution, from this ranked set of words. And again, you have to choose your corpus, right? You could choose Twitter, take the top 1,000 words used on Twitter, and it's kind of a weird set of words. We'll talk about that later on. You just have RT in there for lol and all this sort of stuff. You could use the New York Times, right? You could do different sources. There isn't one, there isn't one sort of ordering of words for any language. You have to define the corpus, which is reasonable. So this one is using the top 1,000, which is pretty limited, right? So this is trying to describe a submarine, so a boat that goes under the sea, works out okay. And then the whole thing is, and even the title, everything in this whole thing is from this very top end of ZIF's distribution. The pusher, machines that turn the pusher, right? It's a nice job. And then you can, of course, he's making money out of this. Good for him. This is a rocket. And it's an Upgoer 5. There's no rocket in there. So a challenge. We need those unusual words, and they have real power and value, and we know them generally. I'll come back to some more things about words because we have this we have some really fantastic people here at UVM when it comes to words. And I'll get to one of them. So this is, okay, so let's look at these distributions a little more. So this is a Gaussian, right? This is a fantastic, famous thing. What is the pi doing there? No, I mean, it's amazing, right? This is a great achievement, fantastic. So one of the great integrals of all time. So here's just a random Gaussian, right? So it's got some mean, some standard deviation of 1. And this is, and I said we could look at these things on log-log scales. This is a Gaussian on log-log scale. No one would ever do this. It's a bit of a weird thing to do. Log normals are a different thing. All right, but that's just to show you these two pieces. Okay, so here's a little thing. Just sketch in the same way, sketch this, right? Sketch this plot for 1 over x. Use a pencil and paper and sketch, right? Make an x-axis and a probability of x, and then sketch this thing. And the range is x equals 1 to 10 to the 7. just a quick sketch, right? Up to 10 million. You see this down here? I just want you to draw this on a book or the surface or a person or in the air or whatever. 1 over x. That's the probability distribution we're looking at here, which isn't really a probability distribution, but it's too fat. Tails are too heavy. Too much room. Very special 1 over x. And the range is 1 to 10 million, right? That's the thing. You need a 1 and a 10 to the 7. Look at that activity. Blood flowing through your brains. Very abusive, really. 9 a.m. in the morning. Okay. All right, let's look at that. So this is what it looks like. This sort of thing. Right? So it's just boink. So that you would think, right, that this is nothing is going on out here, right? That this is actually for words. It's for the Brown corpus. This is the normalized frequency of occurrence word W, right? And this is the number of distinct words that have that frequency. So this is 1 divided by the total number. This is words that appear once, and there are a lot of them, as I said. This is like the out here. It's a word that appears an enormous amount of times. Right? So number of the appears about, this is a percentage thing, the appears about 6.9% of the time in this corpus, and so there's only one word that appears with that frequency. Now, if you put it on log scale, you see this. So now it starts to, it's lifting this out, and it still seems kind of amazing that something might happen here, but obviously the is a very important word. So now you start to see room on this thing. If you do this with Gaussians and so on, it's not going to work, right? So it starts to look linear. It's a little messy, yeah? But these are all these words that appear. There's only one kind of one word that has that frequency. These are words for which there are 2 that appear that number of times, 3, and then it slowly goes up. And then we get to these words that appear once. All right, so I'm going to show you there are lots of things that have this kind of behavior. We will get to this one, I will derive it, but this is the number of words that have at least a frequency of usage. And again, this is in percentage. The linear one is no good, but the log version is very nice, right? So what we've done is we've essentially taken this one and done it with complementary cumulative, right? So we've integrated this way, and we've said how many words have at least this frequency of usage. So you're adding up this way, integrating this way. We'll get to that. And that cleans this up and makes a nice power law. The exponent is actually different. Instead of minus gamma, it's going to be minus gamma plus 1, which we'll get to. But you can see if you want to do a regression, that's not bad, right? We should be able to fit a straight line to this thing, less so this one, right? This is a little bit messy, but this is not so bad. All right.